It's crazy because anyone can hang out their shingle and call themselves a coach these days. And I'll tell you this, not all coaches are created equal, right? You want to find somebody that's got some business background or they've literally done what it is you're trying to do. And that's one of the things that people love about coaching with me is they don't just get me or someone on my team. They literally get access to all of the people that I've, kind of met.
Today's guest is Trevor McGregor, a real estate investor and high-performance coach with over 40,000 coaching sessions under his belt. We'll explore his journey from working with Tony Robbins to coaching Fortune 500 executives, doctors, attorneys, entrepreneurs, and Olympic athletes. We discuss the secrets of mindset mastery, learn how to rewrite your personal story for success, and dive into the 5 freedoms that can transform your life. Let's start the show. All right, Trevor, I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for blocking off some time to connect. It's super exciting to bring your perspective on. We typically are talking to operators and entrepreneurs, of which you are a part. But as a coach, you bring in a completely unique perspective, especially not only being on the front lines yourself, you're able to witness vicariously others navigating these processes, and through that you are able to glean experience through their own successes and failures. And so there's a number of directions I want to go with this, but I guess to start it out, I wanted to just get a little background on what was your experience like with Tony Robbins and how did you come out of that as part of the top level Tony Robbins coaching. I'd love to hear just sort of what that experience was like for you.
Well, so good. And again, it's an absolutely cool story and I'm happy to share it as, my background was hospitality. I'm from Canada and, I kind of got into that sports thing in my teen years. Then I got into hospitality, had a good run in that. Then I got into real estate. And as I started to, really excel at the real estate investing, people started to come to me, Marcus, and they started to want, me to share my blueprint. And as I gave and gave and gave, these people would go out and start getting success in their own real estate arena. And around that time, I was working with my own Tony Robbins coach who said, Trevor, you're so passionate about business. You're so passionate about real estate and you love helping people. Would you ever consider, coming to work for Tony Robbins? And I laughed. I said, yeah, I'm not a coach. I mean, I'm not an official coach, but yeah, I could throw in a resume and see if I could, kind of add value somewhere part-time. And I literally did that. I put in my resume and I got shortlisted from 500 people down to 250, 250 down to 100, 100 down to 50. And that's when you start to go to all the Tony Robbins events. You got to read all the books. You got to listen to all the CDs. And then I did my practicum out of Orlando, Florida. And when the dust settled, I got offered a full-time job to work with and for the man, the myth, the legend, Tony Robbins. And that's exactly what I did. And because I went and started to do that, Tony would give me all of the real estate clients. I mean, it didn't matter whether they were doing multifamily, single family, self-storage, assisted living, mobile home parks, developing land. I mean, ground up construction. They say, give them to McGregor. And that's really where I cut my teeth working with and for Tony, as well as getting to, kind of pull back the curtain and see what's allowed Tony Robbins to be successful. So as I was coaching there, helping other people and growing my own portfolio, that's really what I've done. And to date, I've done over 40,000 coaching sessions. And yes, Marcus, that's an actual statistic. So I've seen what allows people to achieve phenomenal success in real estate and in business. And I've also seen, what causes people to stay stuck or even fail. And that's really my journey and I'm passionate about it. And that's a great place to start off.
Well, I want to talk about the 40,000, which is a significant number. I think at-bats yields outcomes, right? Regardless
Yes.
of what, how effective you are at it, you will inevitably improve. But before we jump into that, what you mentioned, what made Tony Robbins successful? What made him tick? What did you walk away? You can't encapsulate, I'm sure, that into one sentence, but I want to hear your impressions of what makes him so unique. And I think in that answer, if you could sort of address to some of the naysayers, some of the doubters who think it's a bunch of hogwash,
And for those who have that opinion, there is a Netflix documentary which is pretty moving, and pretty incredible. And Tony's gone on to do a number of different things outside of coaching per se. So he sort of backs up what he preaches, right? But I'm really interested on the inside. What was your takeaway from being around
Oh,
him
such
and working with him?
yeah, such a great question. And again, a lot of people think that Tony Robbins is a motivational speaker, and he is a motivational speaker, but he's far deeper than that. And I mean, he's been doing this work, Marcus, since he was 17 years old, and he just turned 64, I believe. I think he's 64 years of age. So, when you really unpack what drives that man, it's really an insatiable appetite, to really understand what drives the human condition. Why do people think and behave they do? And not just in business or in real estate, but in their health, in their wealth, in their relationships as business owners. And, speaking of that, Tony's at that stage of his career now where he has 115 different businesses that do roughly $7.5 billion a year, in sales. So some of those are his personal growth companies, some are real estate, some of it is a prosthetics company, some of it is virtual reality. He's into stem cell research. I mean, there's just no stopping this guy. And again, the more that he, pulls back the curtain and really applies, what he calls success to all of these different entities, the bigger he gets. And that success is really a belief that, success is defined as being 80% psychology or how you think, and then 20% mechanics or, how you act or what you do with it. And that's really what he taught me is that, without really having what we call mindset mastery, you're probably going to take a lot longer to go from where you are to where you want to be than if you condition this 3-pound mass between our ears, for all of the ups and downs of what life and what business hands us. So that's really what I love about Tony. And, I worked with him for, gosh, over half a decade as one of his top master platinum coaches. And then it got to that point where, man, I was being, pulled in so many directions and had such a big client load that I ended up leaving Tony Robbins to start Trevor McGregor International. And that was back in, gosh, 2017. And I've been literally doing the same thing, ever since, but really under my own brand.
That's so interesting. So I'm going to go to this 80/20 in another question, but the 80% psychology, 20% mechanics. I think Tony, and to a large degree, I think you would fit this category as well. It's sort of motivational speaking is a you can put whatever label you want with it, but he's a modern day philosopher in a lot of ways.
Yes.
His level of thinking is broad and deep. But you can have a great mind and no execution. So that brings up sort of that 20%. I think in that 20%, what where I'm going with this is where do you see the rubber meeting the road in terms of mindset? You have a great idea, but to get up every day when the flywheel hasn't gone into effect yet, or in every stage, the flywheel starts, but then you go to that next level, and you got to sort of get into a new gear. How do you define mindset? What's your approach to shaping it? How do you break it down? Or if you think that, I mean, is it important to break the mindset down with clients? This is sort of what I want to dig into with you, because I think you have a lot to say and a lot of value to provide about what are the systems we can start to integrate into our lives to become better people, better personal operators.
Yes. Well, again, this is my bread and butter, and I could talk for hours about this because ultimately, when we think about, even what mindset is really, your approach to life in terms of your beliefs, your values, and your rules. And we call that BVR. So, whatever beliefs, whatever values, and whatever rules you have is really going to dictate how you tend to show up and how you perform. And really, to make it even, easier for the listener to understand, is there's really 4 words that all start with the letter S, as in Superman, that we really think about when it comes to mindset and execution. And if we want to go into those, I think the listener can really think about where they're at in terms of these 4 things. Do you want to do that now?
I'd love that.
All right. Well, all the 4 words are as follows. I'll give them to you and then we'll unpack each of them, because the first one is your state. The second one is your story. The third one is your standards. And then last but not least, it's your strategy. right? So let's unpack all of that, because the first one is the most important, and that is your state. And state really refers to, Marcus, what are you feeling? What are you focused on? What language are you using? Because there's that old quote that where focus goes, energy flows. And unfortunately, most people are focused on what they don't want, right? It's a fast paced world out there. And, we've got the economy, we've got the political election, we've got, extreme weather, we've got uncertainty. And so they're focused on, how to survive, or they're focused on how to kind of, bail the water out of the boat, instead of what they really should be focused on is, how can I step up and achieve more and leverage the people around me to really go from where I am to where I want to be. So really the listener can check in with themselves and ask, where is my focus? And am I in what we call a moving away from modality? And that is, moving away from what we don't want, or am I in a moving towards modality? And I'll give you an example of that. I mean, I can walk down any street in the US or anywhere in Canada, anywhere in the world for that matter, and I hear people talking about the big three. And you hear things like, well, I don't want to be broke, I don't want to be fat, and I don't want to be lonely. And that's exactly what people remain. They remain broke, fat, and lonely, because that's what they're focused on, instead of, I want to be abundant, right? I want to be in great shape, and I want to have amazing relationships with my spouse, my kids, my coworkers, my team. And again, wherever you focus, you're going to absolutely move towards. It's like that old analogy. If a Formula One driver goes into a skid, they tell him not to look at the wall, because if you look at the wall, you're going to hit the wall. You got to look at the open space to move the car into. And so as we unpack that first S, and I'll throw it over to you, you start to see that without the right state, we're not going anywhere.
That's so when you talk about state, that's really interesting. A couple of things that came to mind while you were talking is, you think of the great athletes, the Tom Brady's, the Michael Jordans of the world, the Kobe Bryants. A lot of them talk about how much they hate losing.
Yes.
Right. And the desire to, they hate losing more than they love winning. But in order to achieve that, in each of those cases, you see the regimen that they put in place between their diet and their exercise, even mental coaching, their physiology, their nutrition.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of value in that. So how do you take, and I want to go through the other S's as well. But before we move the state subject, how do you realign some of your clients who you find
Sure.
bringing in some of the negative avoidance type of behaviors?
Well, it's no different than, like you say, a professional athlete. You're going to have thoughts and feelings that are negative. We got a lot of, things going on in the world right now. And, I'm going to kick it off with a great quote. And that quote comes from Tony Robbins' first coach, which was Jim Rohn, where he said this, that it's not the winds that blow on you that will determine where you end up. It's the set of the sail. And I absolutely love that. It's one of my favorite quotes. He says, it's not the winds that blow on you that will determine where you end up. It's the set of the sail. And like I said earlier, we got the economic wind, we got the interest rate wind, we got the insurance wind. I mean, we got the business wind. We've got, so much going on that there's a lot of wind blowing on everyone that's listening to this, including professional athletes. When you talk about Tom Brady, oftentimes, as good as he was, he'd fumble the football. Or oftentimes he'd throw a pass and, the wide receiver would drop it. Or Jordan or Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul, or LeBron James goes up in the fourth quarter with 3 minutes left and misses the hoop. Well, they got to get the ball back, whether it's a football, a basketball, or a golf ball, or a hockey puck. The best of the best of the best have something called speed of recovery. And when I work with Olympic athletes, because I work with a lot of Olympic athletes, and I've had, a good friend of mine win Olympic gold in the Winter Olympics, it's really conditioning that state to believe that, what's wrong is always available, but so is what's right. And the way that we do that is we absolutely start by really looking at someone's physiology. That is, what are they doing in their body? Are they getting up early? Are they meditating? Are they working out? Are they hydrating, right? Are they literally doing some of the things that can give them what we call the competitive edge in business and in life? And once you get your physiology going, then you've got to really think about that word focus, right? Because Tom Brady was focused on one thing, winning Super Bowl championships, as was Michael Jordan, winning world championships. So really, when you think about what they're focused on, combined with their physiology, that's the 1-2 punch. But oftentimes I find with my clients, it's the language that they use and not just what they say out loud, but that internal dialogue, that internal voice that goes, you're not enough, you don't have the money, you're going to lose money, you don't have the resources, it's too hard. And they've got to really remember that that's the work of what we call the saboteur, when you've also got a voice inside you that's called the wise sage, SAGE, which is the wisdom that knows that for the committed, there's always a way. And that's really when you look at Brady or Jordan or Kobe or Tiger Woods or Wayne Gretzky or anybody, they've got this extra gear with their focus and with their state management that most people will never, ever, ever have. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. What do you think, just because we're talking about sports real quick and the US Open is on, what do you think is the delta, the difference between those in the top five and those ranked 20 to 40?
Yeah, it's constant and never-ending improvement in, the wiring in their head, the visualization, the commitment to practice. I mean, the Olympics were just on. We, think about somebody like Michael Phelps, and I don't know how many medals he won, maybe 24, 25, 26, somewhere in there, but I mean, he was relentless. He literally would not only, train all day long, but the secret to his, winning was almost, not just how he conditioned his body, nutrition wise or workout wise, but he got, more rest than most swimmers would ever get because he had an afternoon siesta. And then he made sure he got a full night's rest. And that's when the body repairs. That's when the body, does all of those things that people that stay up late or don't get the proper rest or don't get the proper nutrition. I mean, these people leave no stone unturned. And they also really practice what Tony Robbins says, and that's really that success leaves clues.
Hmm.
You don't have to figure everything out on your own, nor did Brady, nor did Gretzky, nor did Jordan. They would surround themselves with visualization coaches and trainers and nutritionists and, massage therapists and everyone that would give them a 5, 10, or 15% competitive edge over somebody that doesn't, commit to doing that. So whether it's a business owner, a franchise owner, a real estate investor, a pro athlete that I work with, or an Olympian, it's really asking yourself, where am I at today in my state management and what could I do tomorrow to really start moving up the ladder of success?
Talk to me a little bit about story now. The
You
second
bet.
S.
That second S is my favorite S word, and that is your story. And the story is really your identity. I mean, are you a victim to what's going on in the world, or are you choosing to be a victor on your way to victory? And again, it's terrible to say this, but most people are feeling like victims. Victim to the government, victim to the economy, victim to interest rates, victim to, their business partner not working as hard, victim to their spouse wanting them to be home more and not at work so late. And as we literally, continue this day in and day out, it compounds to where it's almost like, we're up against a brick wall when it's really partially our own fault for feeling like we're a victim or feeling like this is as good as it's going to get, or feeling like there's a limit to how much money we could make or a limit to how much we could pay an executive assistant or a virtual assistant to help us. And so what I love about this is we all have the opportunity, and this is what Tony does really good, to rewrite the story to win. Because again, what's wrong is always available, but so is what's right. And most people don't understand that, they're doing what we call negative stacking. And that's, all the reasons why they can't move forward. They can't make more money. They can't be more successful. They can't start a new business, when you've got to flip that around and start doing what we call positive stacking. And positive stacking is really creating a reference for every single thing that is good and then building on top of it, where you just keep going until you have a skyscraper of good on top of good. And is it easy to figure it out? Not necessarily, but when you have a coach, a teacher, a mentor, a trainer, a facilitator, helping you to see that, the inside of the jar oftentimes can't read the outside of the label. It's really where you can really start to build that tower of greatness. But again, that's the big one I find right now is if you don't have a really good state and you don't have a compelling story, you're probably going to plateau. What do you think, Marcus?
How would you define identity in that
Identity
circumstance?
is really how we believe, who we believe we are, And, for a lot of people, they will say, well, I'm not smart enough. I'm not educated enough. I'm not old enough. I don't have enough experience. I'm undercapitalized and don't have the money to do what I want. You don't understand. I came from a different country. I don't speak the language. My skin color is different. I mean, insert excuse here. And while some of those things might be true, right? Even if they're true, you've got to write the story to win. And that's why when you look, at, different people that come to this country that really believe that this is America is one of the greatest places to achieve freedom financially, they'll do whatever it takes, oftentimes over somebody that's been here and is maybe a little bit lazy or a little bit entitled. And, it's interesting that we open up that can of worms, but I work with doctors and attorneys and Fortune 500 executives and I mean, business owners, franchise owners, you name it. And it's absolutely fascinating to see who's stuck in their story and who's willing to, let go of that story and not just be interested in writing a new one, but really what I call being defiantly committed to writing a new story because it's there where, we go back to Michael Jordan. He was cut from his high school basketball team. Well, he could have absolutely been angry, frustrated, pissed off, right? But he chose to use that as power to rewrite the story to become arguably one of the top basketball players of all time. Again, Tony Robbins, same kind of thing. He was a janitor at the age of 17, and he started to go to these events with Jim Rohn, started to read books, started to devour audio cassettes and everything else. And in a relatively short amount of time, Tony literally became, the one to watch. So it doesn't matter where you are, what you're saying to yourself. You've really got to understand, Marcus, that we really have three time capsules that we think in. And I'll give you those three because for a lot of us that we really, are trying to change our story, we often get stuck in our past, right? But the past is only one of those three times when we also have the present and we also have number three, which is called the predictable future. But because we have more references to the past than we do the present or the predictable future, we tend to think and behave from the past or make decisions from the past. And that's okay for average people. But if you really want to change the way that, life is for you, you got to get out of what we call the familiar past and into the present, because this is where we get to rewrite that story to create again that predictable future. What do you want? Where do you want to go? How quickly do you want to get there? Do you want to do it on your own or with a team? I mean, there's so many things that go into it where, we're all conscious creators and we've all been given something called dominion over. And dominion over is just a fancy term for the power to choose. I mean, when you think of any other, species on the planet, they operate by instinct, where we have the ability to think and deduce and make change. And ultimately, most people have forgotten that because they've gone to work for someone else, or they've been told what to do, or read this textbook, go to this college, get this degree. When you really look at entrepreneurs, and if you go back 150 years ago, we were all entrepreneurs. We were, blacksmiths, butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, farmers. I mean, it really wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that we started to go work for other people. And I think that it's time to return to a story that if you want to be an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur, you can write that story to win. So that's a little bit of how I'd speak to that, Marcus. What
I
do you
think
think?
that's super fascinating. Something that seems to creep up on multiple levels that I among successful people, achievers, go getters. There's obviously goals, right? Everybody has goals, but I
Sure.
think more important than goals is you talk. And I'm very interested in identity, especially as a new dad. I'm witnessing a child without any shadow self formed yet.
Yep.
There's no shame. Everything is within his nature and how he behaves. And witnessing that in a lot of ways over the last couple of years, I've really broken down my own identity and really what is that and how does it shape itself. And I think identity, in my opinion, when I try and put it into practical terms, I think I had an identity in high school. It got reshaped a little bit and different into college. And maybe when I got into the working world, it then got reshaped. But I think there's a pattern or a tendency sometimes for us to stay really stuck in who we think we are. And what is common among these entrepreneurs is that they identify with a future self. They identify with I'm sure you've heard this concept that you don't rise to the level of your aspirations, you fall to the level of your systems. And if you've built systems that are in line with your future self, it compels a sense of forward progress that, number one, helps to eliminate some of the ego, in my opinion, because you're serving a greater master to some degree. And then secondly, what the voice you sort of share with yourself, which I find extraordinarily fascinating. I heard a podcast with Dr. Jim Lair, who has coached some athletes, I believe some executives. But one thing he brought up was the voice that you punish yourself with is very unlikely to be the voice you counsel your child with, right? And I did find that point where you really berate yourself for how stupid you've been, how embarrassing it is, that type of concept. And I started to try this experiment of journaling from the wise sage you referenced,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
To be thinking about that 85-year-old Marcus who's looking at me and saying, and with one objective, which is to yield the greatest output. What can I say to myself to create the outcome I'm seeking, right? Whatever that may be. And it's never the belligerent abuser that's coming at you. That's completely counterproductive. So how do you rewire your brain to reframe that story?
Oh, it's so good. So good. So first off, congratulations on your son and for that share there, because, you know, I always talk about being defiantly committed, to change. And most people will do that for a little bit, but then they'll stop and they'll plateau. And then they'll go, God, I better get back at it. And they'll do it again, like journaling or meditating or reading or listening to great podcasts, even rereading books like Think and Grow Rich, which has become one of my favorite books of all time, almost like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where honestly, I've read that book over 100 times. And even my kids, I have 3 boys, they can recite passages from the audio program because we play it in the SUV or the Tesla wherever we go. And I think repetition is the mother of skill. And when you think about the book Think and Grow Rich that Napoleon Hill wrote, he says that in that book, the real essence of the book will be revealed on various pages for different people throughout the book. Well, spoiler alert, the book is revealed on the cover because it says Think and Grow Rich. He didn't write the book Do and Grow Rich. So when you think of how do we think and grow rich, oftentimes we can go to that future self. And I don't suggest you just go to your 85-year-old self. I suggest you, see yourself 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 or 40 or 50, and really fall in love with that person. Because just like, we're talking about this, we all talk about, and there's a great book by Dr. Benjamin Hardy called The Gap and the Gain, right? The Gap and the Gain. I'm not sure if you read it, but most people are focused on the gap of where they are versus where they want to be 5, 10, 20, 30 years out. When what he says is you got to start with the gain. You got to look at, well, how far have you come in your identity in the past 5 years or 10 years? Or how far have you come as a father since your son, was born and you brought him home from the hospital? And we forget that absolutely life is a journey of ups and downs. And it's called the law of polarity, where we can't have great things happen as a father, as a husband, as a business owner without sometimes having that lower self or that saboteur self coming in going, you blew that, or you lost money, or you shouldn't have done that, or why was I so stupid? But again, you got to really ask yourself, which narrative are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to that saboteur more often? Or are you going to be aware of it, not make it good or bad or right or wrong, but choose to check in with that future self or that wise sage to close that gap and move to the next level? So it really comes back to, which voice are you listening to? What are you focused on? What are you feeling? And something that I think is really powerful that Tony talks about quite often called emotional homes. So, what's an emotional home? Well, an emotional home is almost like where we live most often. And so, if you think about my home or your home, we're probably in our kitchen a lot. We're probably in our bedroom because we sleep there. We're probably in our home office. And Tony says, just like you spend more time in those rooms than any other room in your house, you've got to be aware of the emotions that you spend the most time in. And again, for most people, they're in doubt, they're in fear, they're in anxiety, they're in pessimism, where you've got to really park that to move into things like courage, optimism, possibility, or gamification. Because I'll tell you this, Marcus, the quality of your ability to own those emotional homes will oftentimes dictate where you're going to go in the next 2, 3, 5 minutes, let alone the next 3, 2, 5, 8, 10, 20 years. So what do you think of all of that? And what do you want to highlight in anything I said there? Because that was a bit of a fire hose.
No, that I think that was what's interesting to me. I mean, what I take away is agency. You are the polarity between either being a victim or being someone who has the power to change your outcomes and to influence the future how you deem fit. And for
Beautiful.
me, I the more agency you take upon yourself, the more it begets more agency, in my opinion. The more responsible. I'm sure you've heard of the Jocko concept and book of sort of radical, and I'm blanking out, but it's radical responsibility, right?
Yep.
And
Or
it's
extreme ownership. David
extreme
Goggins,
ownership.
extreme
There you take
ownership.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
So these
Yep.
concepts to me are really powerful in that. And I'm fortunate because I think there's the theory that you're sort of the average of the five people you spend your most time with.
Yes.
And I'm very grateful, and maybe it's by accident or maybe it's because I'm attracted to it. But the people in my community that I spend the most time with tend to have an extraordinary amount of agency in that we show up with a lot of assets and very few liabilities as a group, where
Yep.
if somebody needs to go do something or contribute to the group, they take it upon themselves to just go do it. They're not seeking for feedback and approval and
Yep.
permission. These types of things are totally different from what I'm experiencing. And I think the more you surround yourself with that, the more normal it becomes. And the idea of falling victim to something is really outside. It becomes outside of your own orbit, right? It's not something that ever enters your own thought process. But I want to
No,
keep
it's
going through
so good. So
these
good.
other
Can I jump
assets
on
too.
one? I'll
Yeah,
jump on
absolutely.
one thing you said there. And that's something, I mean, I'm in my early 50s. I may not look like it, but I've been on this planet for 5 decades. And if there's one thing that really separates the boys from the men and the women from the girls, it's a peer group, right? When you think about your state and your story, the more time you spend with other people that are high performers, business owners, entrepreneurs, people that have also had similar ups and downs to you, you don't feel like you're an island, right? And I think a lot of people, especially through the pandemic and COVID and all of that, they felt isolated or they felt like an island versus understanding that, hey, other people have had challenges in their state and their story. But as you get around them and you share and you are open and you're doing it from a place of, adding value so that other people don't perhaps make the same mistakes you have, or you don't make the same mistakes they have, that collective consciousness just absolutely radically changes our ability to close that gap to go from where we are to where we want to be in higher stages. So I love that you put that in there because part of my story is always not only being a coach, but having coaches, right? Or always being a part of a mastermind, or always being a part of a group that goes and travels this beautiful planet. Because, I think most people are living in what I call Groundhog Day, trying to grind when that's not what it's about. It's about, doing what you need to do, but also finding a little bit of what we call flow, right? So you're either in your hustle in your story or you're in your hustle in your flow. And hustle is when you're taking care of business, paying the bills, taking care of the assets, working with your customers. But flow is really taking care of yourself. It's date night with your spouse. It's taking your kid to the park. It's having, a great long weekend. And maybe you have a staycation, maybe you travel nationally, or maybe you travel internationally. I mean, Lisa and I, we just came back from 6 weeks in Europe over the summer of 2024. And my saboteur self said, geez, can you really be away from the office for 6 weeks? Where my sage went, absolutely, you go. And we were in places like Rome and Florence, Milan, Barcelona, Ibiza, gosh, where else were we? Estonia, Amsterdam, and London, and then kind of flew back through Dubai. And I'm telling you, we're already planning our next summer holiday because, again, we've now got a reference that for anyone that's defiantly committed, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe you literally want to go move countries and live somewhere else. Everything that you ever dream of is possible when you hold space for that possibility. What do you think of that?
I think that's a great segue into, well, I want to get to standards and strategy, but when you talk about vacation, and you mentioned Ben Hardy's book, because he co-authored it with Dan Sullivan, and I've been a strategic coach client for a few years. Um,
Awesome.
Monitoring the gap and the gain, I think, are really critical. But inherent in sort of that ecosystem is the idea of a self-managing company that allows for
Mhm.
that. Where you
Yep.
can actually check out and reap the rewards of being on vacation. Because I wanted to. It almost seems sort of a foolish question, but I wanted to ask what takeaways do you have coming back from vacation? What are the benefits that you see, and two, how did you get to the point where you can check out? I mean, I know you weren't 100% checked out, but to the
Yep.
extent that you were, how do you set up a system that allows for that? How do you coach people to get to that place?
You bet. So you've opened up two loops there, Marcus. And I guess the first one is, most people are literally grinding it out, believing that, they've got to do it the way they've always done it rather than, using the L word. And when we get to strategy, we'll talk a little bit about this more, but, really leveraging people, systems. You think about, what Dan Sullivan teaches at Strategic Coach, or what, if you read the book Traction, or if you're in GoBundance or some of these other things where, you really start to realize that, what, if you're afraid to let go and let someone else do something, it's not good or bad, right or wrong, but you got to ask yourself, am I really feeling, some fear around not wanting to give up approval, not wanting to give up control, or not wanting to give up safety? Because when I really unpack that with clients, it's really a fear of, you know, control or approval or safety. And when we give that up, we don't feel very good. So you got to get to a place where you're willing to hand something to someone. That could be an executive assistant, that could be a partner, that could be a VA, that could be leveraging AI and technology nowadays. But for you to do something like travel for more than a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you got to get past that belief that, man, I got to be in the office slogging it out. The second part of that is I believe, and I'm sure you share this belief, and I think we've traveled to many of the same conferences and we run in the same circles, that, for high performers, going on a vacation is not a should, it's a must, right? Because that's what allows you to kind of get out of the office and go out there and see the world, see different people, see different culture, eat different food. And I think that that's really where I can really speak to the fact that it really allows me to recharge my batteries and get different perspective, and even turn on more of what we call the creative codes. Because as I'm in an airplane, I'm in a beautiful resort, I'm dining in some beautiful restaurants, meeting some of my clients, because I have clients around the world, I gain a higher perspective. And that fires me up and fuels me to really, almost, go after it, knowing that I'm going to learn something. I'm going to meet someone. I'm going to see a different way of doing something that when I get back to the office, I can implement it. But if I never left the office to go experience that, I would never recharge my batteries or get a worldly perspective on how other people are really taking their businesses and their life to a whole new level. So those are the two things I'd speak to there. What do you think?
Great feedback. Great feedback. One last question before we move to standards. You mentioned a coach. What would you ever, how do you advise, how would you advise someone considering a coach to evaluate whether a coach is a fit?
Oh, such a great question. You've got some really good ones today. So great job. It's crazy because anyone can hang out their shingle and call themselves a coach these days. And I'll tell you this, not all coaches are created equal, right? You want to find somebody that's got some business background, or they've literally done what it is you're trying to do. You want to find somebody that isn't just a one off where, they've had some lucky success, but, that they've repeatedly put points on the scoreboard in either one discipline, and that might be business or multifamily or e-commerce or sports or something. But I like to find people that are multifaceted who open up their Rolodex and introduce me to other people so that I've got, even more of a peer group to move towards. And that's one of the things that people love about coaching with me is they don't just get me or someone on my team. They literally get access to all of the people that I've, kind of met after doing 40,000 coaching sessions. I mean, I coach millionaires, I coach billionaires. I've already mentioned the people that I coach at Microsoft or American Express, some of the Fortune 500 companies, right down to people that are startups, right down to people that are, selling their companies for 10 million, 40 million, 100 million, where private equity comes along and says, hey, we'd like to buy your shop. And I think, again, that has really given me what I call range. And if your coach that you're considering hiring doesn't have range, you should probably find a coach that does have a little bit more range. But you also have to really think about passion, right? To work with somebody that is just there to coach, that's one thing. But when you find a coach that's passionate about helping other people explode their results, I mean, there's something to be said for hanging around with that, because it almost feeds the mind and feeds the body and feeds the soul that there's always another level to get to. And it doesn't matter if it's in your career, in your finances, in your health, in your relationships, in your travel, or in your tithing. I'm telling you, all of us could really, absolutely take our life and our business and our finances to the next level. And it's really something that I coach around called the 5 freedoms. So Marcus, I don't know, have you ever heard me talk about the 5 freedoms that I believe everybody is after?
I have not.
Can I go through them now? Because they're
Please.
delicious. And I think you or the listener will really be able to say, man, I want these 5 things. So let's kick it off with number 1 of the 5 freedoms, which is number 1, financial freedom, right? Let's get that money thing handled. Let's move towards the goal that we set for our active income, our passive income, our net worth. And remember, it's going to keep moving as long as you keep moving. Even for some of my clients, they get to that point in their late 30s, early 40s or 50s where they realize that high performers have what we call multiple streams of income. So if you've only got one source of income, when would now be a good time to perhaps diversify, start a side hustle, do a JV with somebody that can help you to win the game of financial freedom? That's number 1. What do you think of that?
I love it. Keep going.
You bet. Number 2 is what I call time freedom, right? Once you have financial freedom, the goal is to really buy back some of your time by leveraging other people, other systems, perhaps AI or technology to help you get some hours back. Because, I teach something called the rule of 168. And if you're not familiar with the rule of 168, it means that we all have 168 hours a week. 24 hours a day times 7 is 168. Now we sleep for a bunch of those, we eat, we pay the bills, we play with the kid. But really, what are you doing with your time, right? Because you have the same amount of time as Richard Branson or Tony Robbins or, even Elon Musk. And so when people say, I don't have time, or God, I'll start that 5 years from now, I always go back to, how bad do you want the financial freedom and the time freedom? What do you think of number 2?
I think it's great. It also seems to come from you can buy more time with more finances.
You bet. Absolutely. And that could be something simple like, having a gardener take care of your landscaping around your house, or a chef helping you with food prep, or somebody, doing your taxes instead of you sitting down and doing. There's always things that we can leverage, right? And the more money you have, the more you're able to identify what is near and dear to your heart that you don't want to do anymore, and you can hire that out. So that's really number 2. And that takes us to number 3 of the 5 freedoms, which is location freedom, right? Location freedom. And that's something I've worked hard at, as we have coaching businesses, consulting businesses, speaking businesses. We have a publishing company. We have a huge real estate portfolio. And, it wasn't always that way. We've kind of added these things as we've gone through our late 30s and 40s, and now we're reaching that, that 50 stage. But I really don't want to be tied to my laptop, nor does my wife. And we want to be able to go out there and have an extended long weekend, or go out there and do a staycation in a city that's nearby, or go to a different country in North America, or, travel to Europe. And, I haven't mentioned this to you right now, but I'm coming to you live from Australia. I'm literally down under for this recording, And I'm absolutely loving it down here. And we do spend a lot of time here. And that's not me beating on my chest. So please understand that's not why I'm sharing that. I'm saying that we have worked hard to really set it up and create this lifestyle by design where we're continually moving towards financial freedom, time freedom, and yes, location freedom. What do you think of number 3?
Couldn't be better than that. I mean, to be able to work from anywhere seems like the golden ticket to happiness, among others. But what's number
You
4?
bet. The final 2 are really interesting because once you start moving towards, financial freedom, time freedom, and location freedom, you really move towards number 4, which is freedom to impact, right? Freedom to impact. That is, what cause do you want to support, or what's near and dear to your heart, or how do you want to leave your legacy? And I'm telling you, different strokes for different folks, but we're not on this planet for very long. Some of us are going to be here for 50 years, 60, 70, 80, or 100. Or maybe as medical technology improves, some of us will be here till 110, 120, or Dan Sullivan wants to live forever. But, I laugh at Dan. But at the end of the day, if you're not doing something you love or something you're passionate about or something that is making impact, you really want to revisit that, right? Because for Lisa and I, my wife, that's why we're coaches. That's why we do couples retreats. That's why we have a publishing company where, it's strictly children's books. And at the end of the day, whether we're on the planet or not, we really believe that the impact we're making now will actually outlast us. What do you think of number 4?
I think it's great. It adds meaning to everything that you're doing, for sure.
That's it. That's it. And Marcus, that takes us to the 5th one of the 5 freedoms, number 5, which is awesome. And that's called freedom of relationships. Freedom of relationships, not freedom from relationships, but freedom of, where you get to go out there and hang out with people that you love to hang out with. Business owners, real estate investors, other, people that are living on purpose and with purpose. So we talk about, you and I being in similar circles, or we talk about the Tony Robbins community or the Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach community, which I love, or anybody that's in GoBundance or Tiger 21 or some of these other things where these people elevate you, right? And you elevate them. So it's mutual. So when you really think about it, who do you want to hang around with moving forward? And I always have this caveat to say that the people you're hanging around with right now, even if it's family, isn't good or bad, right or wrong, but you really want to look at how much time you're spending with them versus really getting into the rooms that you should be in. So to
That's
recap
great.
that, we've got financial freedom, time freedom, location freedom, impact freedom, and relationship freedom. And again, after doing 40,000 coaching sessions and building these businesses and traveling the world, I believe those 5 things are universal. Doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter, where you come from, doesn't matter where you are in your journey. The goal is to really ask yourself, am I interested in having those things, or am I committed to moving towards them at a higher level?
I love those. I love those. I want to close another loop that we were talking about, and I think it'll hopefully, some of these obviously underpin, if not all of them, underpin the other 4 S's. So we've concluded state and story. I want to make sure I
Yep.
give you an opportunity to talk about standards and strategy.
Yep. Let's do it. The third one is your standards. And obviously that is very important right after your state and your story, because this is the easy one where you really got to ask yourself, at what standard am I showing up at, right? Are you mailing it in every day? Or like I said, are you defiantly committed to holding yourself to a higher standard from here forward? That is, what time are you getting up? What time are you meditating? What time are you journaling? When are you moving your body? What are you putting in your body in terms of nutrition? How are you dealing with alcohol or sugar? I mean, social media is another one, because again, a lot of people are doing things that average people do when maybe it's time to raise your standards, right? And it doesn't have to be something radical where people, say, well, I've really got to cut out or go cold turkey with all of that. It's really about what we call improving yourself 5, 10, 20%, and then ultimately getting to that step. And when you get to that step, you can ask yourself, what's the next step or the next step? It's like a staircase. And I think people try to see the whole staircase and do it all at once instead of identifying, what's important in this month and what's important next month. And what do I want to, do to hold myself to a higher standard, with my spouse? Maybe we need to go on more date nights, or maybe you need to, be a little bit more present with your kids and put your phone down at night. Because I'm telling you this, again, in my own personal life and in the lives of my clients, I can tell the quality of where somebody is going to be a year from now to them really revisiting these standards and taking them to a higher level. What do you think of number 3, Marcus?
I think that's maybe the most critical one I've heard so far. Obviously, they all have an impact, but really, this goes back to, in my opinion, identifying with the future self.
So
What
good.
is the standard of your future self?
Yep.
Talk
So
to me
good.
about strategy.
The last one is number 4, and that is a strategy. So when you think about that quote I gave you, that success is 80% psychology and 20% mechanics, this is where we get really into the mechanics where, most people are kind of just freestyling it. Most people are getting up every day going, geez, what should I do today? Instead of having, goals or having a strategy or having a roadmap, a recipe, a blueprint, or a GPS that takes them from where they are forward, right? That would be, like going to an airport and going up to an airplane and getting in an airplane where you don't even know what the destination is. Well, I wouldn't get on that airplane unless I was looking for an adventure, maybe, but I like to know, where am I at? Where do I want to go? Why do I want to go there? What are the first few things that I can start doing to move in that direction? What are the systems that I need that support me staying the course? Who's keeping me accountable? Is that a coach, a business partner, a spouse? Is it, a group that I'm in and maybe a mastermind? And then ultimately, am I measuring my progress? Right? Because when you think about it, you know, if people are going forward and they don't have a vision or they don't have goals or they don't have timelines, self-imposed timelines to meet that, we know the path of least resistance kicks in and we find ourselves sitting on the couch watching Netflix. Well, a little bit of Netflix is okay, but the TV, the Netflix, and social media is what Tony Robbins calls the electronic dream stealer, right? And so you've really got to ask yourself, what do I need to do strategically to get more clear on where I'm at, where I want to go, why I want to go there, and all of those other steps that I just dripped in order to move towards it. And that's number 4. What do you think of that one?
I love it. And this actually dovetails into a question that I want to start drilling down on some of these into actionable advice.
Yep.
And on that note, what what are some of the more effective systems and routines you found successful clients utilize? I would
Yeah.
ask,
Well, there's,
you can even use yourself too, but
yeah.
what would be an ideal day that you found to be a very strong foundation for creating this momentum?
Yeah, well, again, this isn't for everybody, but I get up at 4:30 every morning personally, and when I get out of bed, I start with having what we call an attitude of gratitude, where I don't just get up and get after it. I literally lay in my bed, put my hand on my heart, and I thank the universe, for this opportunity for another day. I mean, something is allowing my heart to beat. My lungs are taking in oxygen. My stomach is digesting the food. I didn't have to pay for this, but boy, am I ever happy that it's happening. So when we start early and you start with an attitude of gratitude, that's the first step. Then you get up, you use the washroom. I use the washroom and then I hydrate. I have a glass of water with lemon. And the reason is we need alkalinity. So when you really have attitude, starting with that attitude, you use the washroom, you hydrate, then it's into moving your mind. And for me, it really is really 4 different disciplines. I'll either meditate for 20 minutes, I'll read a book, I'll journal, I will watch a TED Talk or Tony Robbins or something on YouTube. And the more I feed my mind while I'm doing that, the more I'm, opening up neural pathways for me to have an amazing day. So once I move my mind, then obviously it's time to move the body, right? And when you think about it, most people think, well, I got to go to the gym and I got to work out for an hour. No, you don't. You could do things in your home. You have a home gym, or if you don't, you just need to absolutely do some, movement. You need to do some cardio, and you definitely need to do weights. So again, depending upon what day it is, I've got really a transition that I'll go through there. But really, by the time I've done all of those things, Marcus, I'm now ready to hit the shower, have my morning coffee, and really look at what my outcomes are for the day. I don't just sit down and go, geez, let's start knocking out emails. I set an intention and I really step into, what is it that is the highest impact activity today, right? And what is going to be, my drivers for income? The secondary to that is what systems and what busy work do I need to do? What do I need to delegate? What do I need to, do? What do I need to delay or what do I need to dump? And so it's a real methodology where I literally work with my paper calendar, I work with my goal sheets, I work with my electronic calendar, but I never go into the day, uncertain about what I'm doing, where I'm going, who I'm speaking with. And I also leave a little bit of what we call space for grace, right? Because stuff's going to come up. There's going to be something happening at a property. There's going to be something that my accountant needs or something that my spouse or my kids need. And so I don't pack my schedule so full that I can't breathe. But I also set an intention that, whatever comes up, I'm either going to deal with it based on the severity of it, or I'm going to stay in my lane and deal with it another time. And I think that's where a lot of people really don't understand the difference between what's urgent and important because they think that everything is urgent when it's not. You got to start getting more clarity on what's important so that you can absolutely tackle it as it kind of comes your way. And then, really, at the end of the day, I celebrate what were the top 3 things I did that day. And then, you know what? I close down the computer, I put the headphones away, I make sure my office is set up for the next day. And then I go off with Lisa and the boys, and we'll either, go to the beach and do a walk, or we'll go bike riding, or we'll go out to eat, or we'll do something, that the family's got going on because my kids are big into sports. But I'm telling you, that's the recipe for success. And it's very, very consistent, right? That it doesn't matter if it's the weekend or even a long weekend. I'm still up at 4:30 every day because that's what my body is trained to get up at. And so I use that time, effectively. On the weekends, I'll go play a little bit of golf or a little bit of tennis or, do something like hiking or whatever. But I'm telling you, if people move their body more, they would move their mind more. They would become more creative. And that's really what I'm trying to get more people to do, is unleash that creativity again, because anything is possible when you put your mind to it. But if you hit the snooze button 5 times and you get up late and you yell at the kids and you get in the shower and you slam down a cup of coffee, that's not how high performers start their day. What do you think?
I think that's great feedback. I recently heard an interview with Deion Sanders, and he talked about
Yep.
setting his temperature in the morning,
Yes. Yep.
priming himself for the day to make sure that he was cool, calm, and collected. It was something that he
So
brought
good.
up. I found it interesting. But on that note, in terms of bringing out the creativity that you're alluding to, what are some of the most common hurdles that in your 40,000 clients? I'll preface it with this. I sort of think there's maybe, if it's 50 or 100 types of people out there, dads working in a certain industry, whatever that case may be. Our problems are not all that unique when you boil them down. And I'm just
Not at all.
curious, what are the common, in 40,000 clients, what comes up most frequently? Almost, I would imagine you've got some predictive ability to know
Sure.
within
Of course.
20 minutes or 5 minutes of talking to somebody what's going to
3
come out.
minutes. Yeah, I love that you share that. And again, it's not me beating on my chest, but you can't work for Tony Robbins and can't do that many coaching calls and run that many businesses without becoming what we call a pattern recognition specialist. So when you think about it, I've become a pattern recognition specialist with, business people all over this beautiful planet, where within 3 to 5 minutes, I already know, where they're going or where they're hitting the wall or what they might need. But the beautiful thing about coaching is to really help the client to, find that answer themselves or help them move towards it. Or if they can't find it, impart some wisdom from something that I've learned in my journey. Right. And that's really something where, oh my gosh, I could talk about this for hours, that most people believe that, they've got these problems and they're so focused on those problems that they don't look for what we call creative solutions. And what I do with clients and get them to really believe, and I think you'll like this, is I don't just come up with one solution to a problem, right? I like to come up with 2 or 3 or 4, because if you have one choice to solve a problem, you have no choice. There's nothing to choose. 2 choices is better, but that's even a dilemma. Is it A or B? where I go, well, is there a third option? Is there a fourth option? And once we put 2, 3, 4, 5 options on the table, now we do what Elon Musk is really good at. Do you know what he's really good at? Reverse engineering stuff. That is, if we've got 5 things that we could do, let's take one of those off the table. And now we've got 4. And let's take another one off the table. And that's left with 3. And I'm going to ask you, out of those 3 things, let's remove one more from the pile. And now we've got 2 choices. And from there, we know that we've looked at things through different lenses. We've taken a look at the top, the bottom, the left, the right, and we're able to absolutely move forward and choose the one that's got the highest and the best probability to get us from where we are to where we want to be. What do you think of that?
So in that though, you're identifying choices. So that is sort of step one of the problem, right? That's
No, it's
academic
not
to some
step
degree.
one. It's really not. To back up and give you some insight and go one step further, we go back and we do what's called defining the problem in solvable terms, right? Because Tony's got this great quote, you've probably heard it, that in order to come up with a solution, you must first understand the problem, right?
Right.
And I think people say it's this problem and I call it a surface problem, when perhaps there's something way underneath that. Maybe it's a root cause of something, a really big problem. It could be childhood trauma, for God's sakes. It could be anything that their business partner said, the bank said, their spouse said, their kids said, and they're trying to solve it instead of really looking at, what's the meaning I'm giving this problem? And lots of
Right.
times people give, the wrong meaning to something, or they think that they're being hard done by, or somebody doesn't like them, or they feel stupid. When once we define that problem in solvable terms and we really call it tight to what the problem even is, oftentimes it's not even a problem. It's a simple challenge. And even changing it from a problem to a challenge softens it and lightens it to where they go, yeah, I'll figure out how to move beyond this challenge, because you know what? I've been on this earth for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and no matter what's ever come my way, I've always figured it out. And I think people forget that in the heat of the moment and they start telling themselves lies. We call them rational lies. We rationalize why this is the end, or why we're going to have to throw in the towel, or we're going to have to get a divorce, or we're going to have to send our kids to a shrink. And I'm telling you, most people think in worst case scenario, right? It's almost like we oftentimes, and we're all human and we all have this, it's not good or bad or right or wrong, but we go to the worst case scenario. When you really think of your life, very rarely has the worst case scenario ever played out, right? So instead of, bringing in energy to make that worst case scenario play out, we oftentimes will say, all right, can we define this problem in solvable terms? Have we ever faced this problem before? Has someone else already navigated how to get over or under or around or through this problem? And then ultimately we take back our personal power and we're able to move it like a hot knife through butter. What do you think?
So that's where I'm going with it, is moving the knife. So we can identify the solution, but I find in many of these conversations and others that when you find the solution, that's a big chunk of getting to the next step. The next
To start.
real critical component is execution. And a lot of times I find it seems common that fear governs a large percentage of people's behavior. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering in your coaching how you address fear.
Well, again, fear is in all of us, right? And again, it's conscious and it's subconscious. So you can't just say, "Oh, get over your fear, let's move beyond that." You've really got to start building a belief table that really says, is that really true? Is it really true that interest rates are preventing anyone from doing a business deal? Is it really true that all the good deals are gone? Is it really true that the broker favors other people or the bank favors other people? And again, I go back to that term, rational lies. We literally build a case around all of these things that may or may not be true. So we start to unpack that by saying, is this really true? Or, how long have I held on to this belief? Or who gave me that belief? Because it could have been your parents or your grandparents or a school teacher. Who would I be without that belief? What's a new belief that serves me better? And really, that's where we take back that, opportunity to rewrite the story to win. And I'm telling you, every single person I've ever coached, men, women, couples, I mean, millionaires, billionaires, sports heroes, all of that, again, they all get into this, poor me pity party when ultimately, we're right? We're resourceful beyond measure. And I remind them that it's not even a matter of resources, it's a matter of resourcefulness. And I learned that from Tony. What do you think of that one?
Well, and I attribute this to Tony. It may not be, but I think my dad has sort of instilled this. But it doesn't matter if it's true or not, as long as it empowers you. And that's
Yep.
something that I do come back to quite a bit
Yep.
when facing a challenge and trying to address knowing what the solution is and whatever hurdle that may be preventing me from moving forward.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, Marcus, because oftentimes you may not know what the solution is, but we take what's called the next logical step, right? And I'll never forget being with Tony, where, oftentimes we'd be at a big coaching event and he'd say, you know what? Pretend that you could come over here and step into what he called his common sense corner. So come over to this corner of the room. It's just you and Tony Robbins, and he's going to literally look you in the eye. And he's 6'7", so he'll be looking down at you, and he's got these big teeth and these big hands, and he'll say, Trevor, what's the next logical step? And if you get out of your head and you drop out of your head and into your heart and in your gut, what's the next thing you could do to move forward? And I oftentimes will say that to a client and they'll say, well, I don't know. And I'll say, I know you don't know, but if you did know, what's the next logical step? And that's when we start to see the wheels turning and they start to go, well, I could do this or could do that. And I'm like, great, let's start there. Let's go do that. Let's climb up steps 1 and 2. And when you get to step 2, it will reveal to you what step 3 and 4 is. And then 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And next thing you know, you're way further ahead than when you were standing on the landing. What do you think of that?
Life rewards action.
That's it. Absolutely. And what I love about you saying that, and I'll give you, huge kudos, it's not action. It's what I call intelligent and inspired action. And here's why I call it intelligent and inspired. Intelligent means smart, right? Whereas inspired means you don't have to do it, you get to do it. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to do this and they have to do that. No, we live in one of the greatest countries in the world. And if everything coming out of your mouth is, I have to do this for myself, my business, my bank, my spouse, my lender, my kids, my parents, we've all got aging parents or grandparents and all of these things. When's the last time you picked up the phone and called your parents or your grandparents because it's the right thing to do? When's the last time you shut down your laptop and you put your phone on airplane mode and you were fully present with your spouse and your kids, right? Because again, with these little devices we carry around in our pockets, we could literally be tied up 24/7. And that's where I really come back to the fact that we're either, human beings or we're human doings. And a lot of people are human doings right now instead of being human beings. What
What
do
a
you
great
think of that one?
distinction. That's a great distinction. This has been phenomenal. I want to bring this into a landing here, and I want to ask you a few questions, uh, which you can take however you'd like. But
You betcha.
especially from a coach, I'm interested to
Yes.
hear your perspective. How would you define success?
Well, I can give you a couple of answers to that because Tony Robbins says it's 80% mindset, 20% mechanics. But I go back to, something Earl Nightingale taught me. And Earl Nightingale was one of the godfathers of coaching, and he said that success is the worthy progression of an idea or ideal. I'll say that again. Success is the progression of a worthy idea or ideal. It's really when we as humans are moving towards something that really lights us up, that we're passionate about, that has meaning or purpose or possibility. So when I think of success in my world, I really think of what are all of the things I'm moving towards in my career, in my finances, in my health, in my relationships, in travel, or in tithing or giving back. And as long as I continue to hold space that I'm constantly and never endingly improving that, that's really what I think success is today. What do you think of that?
Great definition.
Thank you.
What is your diet? What is your mental diet comprised of? What are you reading right now? What are your podcasts you're listening to? What's speaking to you that's feeding the beast?
Oh my goodness, Marcus. There's just so much. And again, as a high performance coach, I think the very, first thing is people might think I know a lot. Well, I think I know very little. So I'm always listening to Tony Robbins, even today, or, Ed Milet, or, real estate podcasts, some of the notable, marketing podcasts and business podcasts, but I also like audiobooks. And when you think about, maybe rereading some of the classics that you've read one time, but now you're a different person. Now you're a husband, you're a father, you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, a real estate investor. That's why I go back to Think and Grow Rich, or even the concept of, traction, or go back to the concept of profit first, or never split the difference. I mean, if you've read some of these books, you've probably got some takeaways, but with repetition being the mother of skill, I'll certainly read new books and listen to new podcasts and audios, but I go back and I do the classics over and over and over again, because every single time I read stuff, I go, God, it wasn't in there the last time I read it, or it jumps out at me different, or I see it through a different lens. And there's that great quote by Dr. Wayne Dyer that says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I'll say it again, that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, right? And nothing is more true to that than reading a classic book, or becoming a parent, or watching your toddler grow. I mean, you definitely get different perspectives, because you're changing and morphing and moving into your higher self the more you play full out with those items. What do you think of that one?
I think that's a great response. Um, well, this has been terrific. You've given us a lot of things to think about. What is the best way to get a hold of you, and who would you be interested in hearing from?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come on your show. I'm super proud of you, and we've known each other for a long time. So it's great to connect with you and just add so much, to you and the listener today. So I appreciate the opportunity. And Marcus, for anyone that wants to get a hold of me, it's pretty easy. You can find me on my website. That's trevormcgregor.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And for anyone that's a high performer, maybe somebody that is, ready to go from where they are to the next level. I do one-to-one coaching. I do a little bit of group coaching. I've got some masterminds. I've got a lot of different things going on. I also have what's called my private podcast, and it's called Rich Beyond Belief. So if you go to my website, trevormcgregor.com, and you scroll down, you'll see that you can literally purchase my private podcast, which is an 8-week audio series that literally costs you less than a nice dinner out with your spouse. You can pick up this 8-week audio program that is really the best of the best of the best of all of the coaching tools that I've used on 40,000 coaching sessions. And so again, I invite people to check that out if you feel that is something you want to learn more about these concepts, or how I use them, or how I have clients use them. It's available to anyone who's defiantly committed to up-leveling. And on top of that, I'm always on podcasts. I often travel around to conferences. I'm standing on stages. I do international keynote speaking, and it's really my passion, right? So those are some of the ways that people can find me.
Great. I really appreciate you being on. This has been a terrific conversation. I appreciate how open you've been. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to congratulate you. And again, we're all part of the same universe. And if you break that word into two, uni means one, and verse means song, right? We're all part of the same song. And I really, commend you and everyone that's listening, as long as we've talked here today, for really not just saying, gosh, Marcus and Trevor, that was great, but think about what they want to implement. Is it their state? Is it their story? Is it their standards or their strategy? I mean, you don't have to do them all at once, but pick one. And we often say, high performers never learn something without, then defiantly committing to implement it in their business or in their life. And so as you do that, as I do that, as the listener does that, I really believe that we're all better together. So thank you again for the opportunity, and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Trevor. It was great connecting.